Thank you for joining us on this BookFest adventure with a man who defied odds and wrote all about it in his best-selling book, Thunder Dog, the story of a blind man, a guide dog, and the triumph of trust at ground zero. Michael Hingson is with us today. When one of 4 hijacked planes flew into the World Trade Center's North Tower on September 11th in 2001, Michael was there. He was a district sales manager for a data protection and network security systems company. And he was sitting down for a meeting, and his guide dog, Roselle, was at his feet. Blind from birth, Michael, this gets me. You could hear the sounds of shattering glass, debris falling, terrified people running, flooding all around you. But your guide dog sat calmly beside you. And in that moment, Michael, you chose to trust Roselle's judgment and not panic. You guys are a team. Fast forward in August 2011, Thunder Dog, the story of a blind man, a guide dog, and the triumph of trust at ground zero was published. Now, you wrote this along with Susie Flory, and it shot straight up to the New York Times bestsellers list in that first week on the market. And even to this day, it's more than 10 years later, you don't see this a lot with backlist books, but it continues to be a top seller, both in print and ebook. Michael inspires millions. He's inspiring me right now. I hope he's doing it to you. He gives readers and people who experience his books, listen to his books, a transformative look into the life and the boundless capabilities of the blind. Also, I want to mention in December of 2013 that Michael, along with Jeanette Hanscom, wrote and published Running with Roselle, How a Blind Boy and a Puppy Grew Up, became best friends, and together survived on one of America's darkest days. So you have 2 books. Michael, thank you for joining us today in this conversation.
Thank you. And we have a 3rd one coming out in August of this year called Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs About Being Brave, Overcoming Adversity, and Walking in Faith. And that book is about helping people learning to control fear rather than being, as I put it, being blinded by fear or overwhelmed by fear when something unexpected happens, like the World Trade Center terrorist attacks. They can learn to use fear as a tool. The issue on September 11th was it was as much Roselle trusting me as I trusted Roselle. When the building was first hit, there wasn't really where we were broken glass and a lot of other things, but the building literally tipped about 20 feet and then it came back. But I had spent a lot of time learning about the complex, learning all I could about what to do in an emergency, learning where all of the emergency exits were, because unlike all of you who just rely on reading signs, if I'm going to be able to function, I needed to know what to do, which is something everyone should do, but most people don't because they think they can just rely on signs. That works until you've got a smoke-filled room. But in any case, I learned what to do. And what I didn't realize until much later was that a mindset was created when I was studying all about the complex and learning where everything was and learning the emergency and evacuation procedures. And because of all of that, I created a mindset, as I recognized much later, that kicked in on September 11th. So it was as much Roselle trusting me because Roselle's job isn't to know where to go and what to do. Roselle's job is to make sure that we walk safely. I have to give her commands. So as I said, it's a team. We both had a job to do, and it was a matter of mutual trust and interdependence.
And that is amazing. In many ways, you're better equipped for the situation because of the fact that, like you said, people who have sight rely on that sight probably way too much, because when it's taken away and there's smoke or they can't read that sign in the moment, they panic and they don't know what to do. And I love how you weave that into taking on fear and transforming that fear. But first, can we stay a little bit more on trust? And just in your own words, Michael, can you tell us what happened that day? How'd you get down the stairs? How did you and your guide dog navigate everything? Can you give us a little bit more of the backstory?
Well, the answer is the same way everyone else did. So look, for me, when the building started to move, and we heard a kind of muffled explosion, and it moved and tipped, and then it came back to a vertical position. And as soon as it stopped moving, a colleague in my office who was in for the day for the sales seminars we were going to be conducting, a colleague from our corporate office, David Frank, looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, there's fire and smoke above us. We got to get out of here right now." And I said, "Slow down, David. No, we got to get out of here right now." And eventually he used what I call the big line. He eventually said, "No, you don't understand. You can't see it." And the problem is that it wasn't what I wasn't seeing. It was what David wasn't seeing. I knew my dog. I knew Roselle was afraid of thunder, but we didn't have thunder that day. And Roselle was being very calm. She was sitting next to me because as soon as the building stopped moving, um, and the last thing it did was it dropped about 6 feet, because tall buildings like that are big springs, and literally they're built with expansion joints, and it was made to tip just like it did. And when it became straight again, then the expansion joints contracted and the building went back to the normal configuration. But as soon as it did that, and David looked out the window and started shouting, "We got to get out of here right now, when the building's on fire," and so on, Roselle was sitting next to me, wagging her tail, yawning, going, "Who woke me up?" And that told me that whatever was occurring, because we had no idea at the time, none of us did. The airplane hit our building 18 floors above us and on the other side of the building. And everybody always says, "Well, you didn't know because you couldn't see it." Excuse me, the last time I checked, Superman and X ray vision are false, fictitious, and don't really exist. Nobody knew. In fact, going all the way down the stairs, all of us on the stairs didn't really know what happened. But what was occurring was that Roselle was just sitting there. And when David said, "No, you don't understand, you can't see it," it was really clear to me that the big problem was what David wasn't seeing, which was a nice, quiet dog not giving any kind of reaction of concern or fear, partly because I wasn't, and partly because she wasn't sensing anything. And that told me that whatever was going on wasn't such an imminent threat that we couldn't at least try to evacuate in an orderly way. And I finally got David to focus, and I said, "Get our guests to the stairs." We had guests in the building. And he did that while I called my wife, Karen, and told her that there had been an explosion or something had gone on. We don't know what, and we're leaving the building. Of course, she wanted to know more, and I didn't know more. She was at home, and I should also explain that Karen is another person with a disability. She was in a wheelchair her whole life, and as I love to tell people, she read, I pushed, worked out really well. And anyway, when we disconnected and David came back, then David and I swept the offices, made sure no one else was there, powered down some of the equipment, couldn't power it all down because we decided we didn't have the time. And then we went to the stairs and we started down. Almost immediately, I began smelling an odor. And it took me about 4 floors to realize what I was smelling were the fumes from burning jet fuel, the burning kerosene, something I'd smelled before at airports, but I never expected to smell it around the World Trade Center, of course, but I did. And when I observed to other people that's what I was smelling, they said, "Yeah, we were trying to figure it out. We must have been hit by an airplane." Well, that was a fair assumption. We all believed it, but that's all we knew, that somehow we must have been hit by an airplane and there's jet fuel that we smelled burning. But that's all we knew. That's all anyone knew all the way down. Even when firefighters passed us coming up the stairs, they wouldn't tell us what was actually going on. I can appreciate that because they didn't know us. They didn't know whether we would panic or not. They clearly had to know, but they wouldn't tell us. Personally, I like information, and I wish that they had told me. I might have made some different decisions a little bit later. But anyway, we went down the stairs. We left our office close to 9:50, so it was about 5 minutes after the plane hit. And then we got to the stairs and started down. We got down to the very bottom at about 9:35, and then by the time we got outside, and I checked my watch, so I knew it was about 9:45. So it was about an hour after the plane hit when we finally got outside. And then David saw a fire in the other tower. And again, we had no idea what had happened. We didn't feel anything and have any clue that another plane had hit the south tower. But that's what occurred. And so we were told to leave the area. We walked over to Broadway and walked north on Broadway and got to Vesey Street. We were maybe, I guess, 100 yards or a little more from Tower 2 when it collapsed. Of course, it's a 400 plus yard tall building. So everyone turned and ran. David ran. He was gone. I turned 180 degrees and started running back south on Broadway the way I had come. got to the next street, which was Fulton Street, turned right on Fulton, and actually caught up to David. It turns out he had gone the same way, and then realized that he had just left me and was going to come back, but I caught up to him first, so we kept going, and eventually we were in the dust cloud, all the dirt and debris from the collapse of the South Tower, and we went into subway station and stayed there for a while till a police officer came and said, "You need to leave now. The air is better outside." Well, it was a little better, but we just continued to walk west on Fulton, and eventually our building collapsed. And as I describe it, the sound of both buildings collapsing was kind of a combination for me of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear metal clattering and glass breaking, and then the white noise of the buildings just pancaking straight down. But that's what occurred. And Roselle was looking to me for direction. I had to tell her when I wanted her to turn left and turn right and so on. And I knew the building and I knew the complex, but I also knew New York and I knew the area. And that was what I needed to do. It was important for me to keep Roselle focused by being calm. And of course, she would become fearful if something caused her to become fearful. I didn't want to be a contributor to that, and nothing else became such a contributor to that that she became fearful. So she worked well, and we worked well as a team, which is what it's really all about.
Yeah, that trust and teamwork, that's amazing. And the bond that we have with our doggos right now, at this very moment, my good boy teddy bear is at my feet. If you could, just imagine this ball of fur, 15 years old. He's just my good bud. And there's just something about dogs, isn't there? Animals in general, but I don't know. I feel like dogs and humans just get along so well. Can you talk about that human and animal bond?
Well, I think you're right, but I also think that most people don't really work it the way they should.
Mm.
Um, People say things like, "Oh, my dog could never do what your dog did. My dog could never be that calm." Um, how do you know? If you don't really work with your dog, if you don't set expectations, if you don't provide rules. My dogs and I work together because I'm the team leader and it's my job to set rules and to set boundaries. And if any of my guide dogs misbehave, then I need to deal with that. And there's usually some sort of reason. Occasionally they just kind of are mischievous. But the problem with most people, they talk about they have this great bond and it's as good as far as it goes. But do they really establish that trusting, teaming relationship? And I find that most people don't really do that. They have a loving relationship, but it isn't the kind of interdependent relationship that I think people and more people could have with their dogs. The fact of the matter is that with guide dogs and with other service dogs and their handlers who truly appreciate the trust and teamwork relationship, it's not just service dogs, it's the difference between people who take the time to really understand what the true relationship can be between dog and person. Dogs do, I think, love unconditionally unless there's just something that damages that. Uh, Dogs do love unconditionally, but they don't trust unconditionally. And that's a different situation. And creating a deep, trusting relationship where each side truly understands the other side and truly understands what the other individual needs and wants, and where the human really recognizes that they are responsible for being a leader of a team. And I, even with pets, the issue is it's still a team if you make it one. If you don't treat it that way, then you'll never have as deep a relationship. But I think everyone could have a much deeper relationship with their dogs than most people have.
Do you have any tips, thoughts on how people can do that if they
Well,
want that deeper
sh-
relationship?
sure. You don't strike an animal. There's no need to do that when they misbehave. You can express your displeasure with sharp words. You might even give a if you have a leash on the dog, you can give a gentle tug. Um, but you have to teach the dog when and what it means or how you're expressing displeasure when they don't do something that they should. Even more important, you reward them and honor them by teaching them what they can really expect from you when they do a great job. And that's what it's really about. I use food rewards in part when my guide dog today, Alamo, and all of my guide dogs mostly, but it's increased with more recent guides because the schools have perfected it more. When the dog does a good job, um, as I train the dog to do something, I will give it food rewards. I don't do it all the time, but I will give food rewards, just a kibble. It doesn't need to be much, just a piece to say, great job, good dog. And when they do something that they shouldn't, the typical command I'll use is leave it or no. And I do it in a fairly sharp, but not an angry tone of voice, but a sharp tone to express displeasure. And the dogs understand that. Again, it's a teaching process, and you have to be, as the human, the teacher and set the expectations.
That's really great advice for so many things, is, being the one that sets those expectations. I love that. And I want to just jog over a little bit and talk more specifically about writing your book. Now, you've written several books, but with the first book, that journey in and of itself is a lot of times something unique for writers. I mean, did you ever anticipate being a writer, writing a book? How did the idea and everything come together to put your story down and tell others about it?
In December of 2002, Roselle and I went to the American Kennel Club Canine Eukanuba Grand National Dog Show Championship because Roselle was going to be honored with an award. And while there, we met George Berger, who was the publisher for the AKC, American Kennel Club Gazette. And he's the one who said, you really ought to write a book. And I said, never thought about doing that. And he said, well, start taking notes and all that. And we talked over the years, and he had an agent that he said could help, but she wanted me to write a business book. And I said, no, it needs to be a more general book. It needs to teach people about blindness, needs to teach people about guide dogs and what they are. And of course, in part, tell the story. But it never totally gelled. But as I love to tell people, by the middle of 2010, I had over 1.2 megabytes of data stored in text files or in Microsoft Word files, notes and thoughts that I had about writing a book. And one Sunday afternoon, a woman named Susie Flory called, and she said, I'm writing a book called Dog Tales, and I want to include Roselle's story. Could you tell me the story? And I said, sure. So I did in detail. And then there was a pause, and she said, you ought to really write your own book, and I'd like to help you with that. Well, that developed into a relationship. And I love collaborating. Some people can do it on their own, and I possibly could do so, but I love collaborating. I know what my skills are and what they're not. And I can write, but I also can enhance when someone else writes and make it even better and augment, as well as writing some of my own content. And so the two of us did collaborate. We worked with her agent, Chip McGregor, who found very quickly Thomas Nelson Publishing, the largest at that time Christian publisher in the country. Now it's part of HarperCollins. But they agreed to publish the book. And of course, as you said earlier, it came out in August of 2011 and went right to the New York Times bestseller list. We were very blessed, and I'm hoping our next book will do the same. It's being published by Tyndale House in, I believe, August of 2024.
Excellent. I'm sure it will be. And thank you for sharing that with us. We'll make sure that we have a link to that book and information when it's ready. I'm curious, Michael, as you're writing, and the fact that you were working with Susie, working with somebody collaboratively, that just speaks volumes to you as a person, because so many writers do feel that they need to go it alone, that having help somehow diminishes the craft, when actually, when people work together, it often heightens everything. But I'm curious, is there anything that you discovered about yourself that you didn't know before during that writing process?
I think more enhanced than discovered. I love collaborating. I love working as a team. Working with 8 guide dogs since 1964, I appreciate trust and teamwork a great deal. And I think that functioning in a teaming environment is always a good thing. But I also learned a lot more about myself as a student, in that Susie knew a lot about writing books, and all of the people who I've worked with in writing know about writing books, and they know things that I don't know. And occasionally, sometimes I contribute things that I have figured out or know that they don't. And I also bring a lot more sales and marketing knowledge to the process, mostly than they. But I learned that, and continue to feel that I love to be a student and learn. So I look for things to learn as I'm going through the writing process. One of the things that happened with Thunderdog, when our people at Thomas Nelson got it, they originally said, well, we're having a problem with the transitions. Well, the way the book is written, every chapter starts with something on September 11th. Then we go back in my life to lessons I learned that help with that particular thing that we're talking about in a chapter. And then when at the end we come back to September 11th and write a little bit more, and then we go to the next chapter. And what one of the people said, what Chad said, was, I'm really having a problem with the transition. You lose me every time you go back or come back to September 11th. And I said, when he made that observation, I will take the weekend and I will fix the transitions. Because immediately I had a thought. Well, I did fix the transitions and everyone loved it. But then when Kirkus, which is the magazine for publishers and libraries and so on, published a review of Thunderdog, I am very blessed that one of the things that they said is that the transitions really worked, and it makes this book a very powerful book. So I liked that. I can't complain about that. But that really, I think, did help the book. And when they said that they were having a problem with the transitions, immediately when I looked at one, I went, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's great that Kirkus pointed that out. Actually, we've done Kirkus reviews and we've done advertising with them as well. And it is a great resource for writers, for publishers, for marketers, for everybody. Even sometimes you can put out that Kirkus review or get that Kirkus review months and months and months in advance. And if they do have some salient advice for writers, they still have a chance to go back and make those fixes because it's so much before the actual pub date. I love that. What about, Michael, can we talk about strategies for the future? What's that about?
Well, I think for me personally, I think one of the things that I started doing after September 11th was also accepting invitations to be hired to come and speak and talk about the lessons from 9/11 that people should learn, talk about trust and teamwork and leadership. One of my favorite speech topics now is called Moving from Diversity to Inclusion. And the reason it's titled that way is that when people talk about diversity, they talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, and so on, but they do not talk about disabilities. And my position is, and more people are learning it, that if you are going to be inclusive, then you have to include disabilities or you're not inclusive. And I've had people say, well, we include other things. Well, you're not inclusive because you leave out disabilities. So the speech is entitled Moving from Diversity to Inclusion, and it talks about that. I have other speeches that I give, Ethics, the Real Bottom Line, Turning the Tables on Terrorism, The Power of Trust and Teamwork, for example. And one I created last year entitled What Would You Do? And that's all about safety and emergency preparedness. One of the things that happened at the beginning of last year was that I got a Google alert one day about an article that somebody wrote concerning a speech that I gave. Now, this gentleman published the article in January 2023 in a magazine, but it was about a speech I gave in 2014. And so, as I love to tell people, how often do you hear about a speaker whose talks are so well remembered that somebody writes about them 9 years later? And so I um, I love that article and have shown it to people. But I think for me, the strategies are to continue to talk about controlling fear, helping people recognize that fear is a powerful tool and it can help, and it doesn't need to overwhelm us no matter what the situation is. And also, so I will continue to travel and speak and do that. And of course, we have the new book coming out. And since August of 2021, I've also been doing a podcast called Unstoppable Mindset. again, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. So most of the podcast episodes are more of the unexpected, which is anything outside of inclusion and diversity. So it's a lot of fun. We have published several, well, let's see, we have published somewhere in the neighborhood of about 215 episodes since August of 2021. In August 2022, we had gotten so much interest in the podcast from people who wanted to be on it, who saw us on LinkedIn, that we went to 2 episodes a week being published. And so having a lot of fun with it, having a lot of fun with speaking, and of course, writing Now Live Like a Guide Dog, and we'll see where we go with it from there.
You've definitely got a lot going on. And as I understand it too, you're involved with the National Federation of the Blind, and you help that organization as well.
I've been a member of the National Federation of the Blind since 1972, so it's been a while.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about people adapting in changing times. Can you tell us your thoughts on that?
It's puzzling to me in some ways that people keep talking about changes all around us and all that, but we hate change. In reality, we don't like to be taken out of our comfort zone. After September 11th, I kept hearing people say, we got to get back to normal. And it took me a while to realize why I reacted so negatively to that. And I finally realized normal will never be the same again. If we go back to normal the way it was pre-September 11th, the same thing is going to happen again. The reality is change is all around us, and we should accept it, we should embrace it, and we should find ways to work within it. And so I believe it's very important that people recognize it's okay to have change. It's okay to have things differently in our lives than maybe we expected. And some things may remain the same. But the fact is that with whatever goes on in our worlds, um, there are a lot of things that we have to learn. It goes back to what I said before about being a student. Change is really all about learning how to deal with making modifications or accepting the fact that things aren't going to be the way they used to be. The pandemic has affected all of us, and I think some of us in a very negative way, which is unfortunate. But the pandemic also offered and offers so many opportunities. Zoom, for example, is a very basic tool that more and more people are using to hold hybrid meetings. And more companies are realizing that there is value in letting people do at least part of, if not most of their work from home in a more relaxed environment. Probably hybrid is better than all one way or the other, but people are realizing that there's value in looking at maybe things in a little different way than we used to. And we don't have to necessarily have people come into the office every single day with such a rigid, regimented schedule. So that's something the pandemic has brought to us. And I think that every time we have different things happen around us, when we make mistakes, when we're successful, if we learn from those things and really understand, so why'd this happen? What do I do about it? Did I do as well as I could, even though it turned out to be successful? Those are all questions I think that are relevant to ask always. One of the things I really encourage people to do is to take time at the end of the day as they're getting ready to fall asleep or as they're lying down starting to fall asleep. Think back on the day. Look at what happened that was good. Look at what happened where maybe there were challenges. I reject the concept of failure. Failure, we don't fail. We may have challenges. We didn't figure out something right, and so something happened that we didn't expect. What do we learn from it? Rather than making it a negative thing. I used to say all the time, I'm my own worst critic. I love to record my speeches and then listen to them because I can hear what I could do better and so on. And I used to say I do that because I'm my own worst critic. I finally realized literally last year, wrong thing to say. Why make it a negative context type of thing? Now what I say is I'm my own best teacher because that's really what I am. And so I choose to learn from whatever goes on in my life. And I choose to believe in the concept of introspection and thinking about what worked, what didn't work, how do I address it, how do I fix it, and is it something I can fix? What else can people teach me? How do I find other people to team with to deal with issues, all of that. But it starts by taking the time to do that. And I reject the fact that we don't have time to do that. Absolutely, we have time to do that if we choose to.
We all have the same amount of time in the day that great folks like Mark Twain and Albert Einstein had. When you really think of it, folks who say, I don't have time, we all have. That's the one thing we have, at least day by day, is time, and how we choose to use it. Like you said, taking those moments at the end of the day can be really powerful and helpful to us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I want to say something too, because you're touching on a few things. When you talk about listening to your speeches over and critiquing yourself, it reminds me of what we did back in the day in radio. It was called an air check. You would tape your show and you would listen back, and sometimes you would do it with the program director. Sometimes you would do it on your own, but I would do it. So I said too many times, or I should change the way I do that outro. So listening and being able to go back and make those changes was so valuable. And I got to tell you something, Michael. I worked at a radio station in Palmdale, and you went to Palmdale High School in California.
KUTY.
I just wanted to say we have that Palmdale connection out of
well, I was program director for a year at KUCI, the University of California Irvine radio station, and I had a really hard time getting people to listen to their shows. And there were people who weren't doing well. And eventually what I did is I worked out something with the engineer so that anytime the mic went live, a cassette recorder started recording. So we recorded what they said. We didn't need all the music. And I gave it to people and I said, you will listen to this before the next show or you're not going to be on. It is amazing when people finally did that, how many people improved and how much they improved. Some people went into radio professionally. Some people went into public speaking professionally almost immediately out of college because they chose to learn. And that's what it's really about.
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
Do you know that Don Imus got his start at KUTY?
Oh, did he really? Oh,
yeah.
Imus. Yeah. Okay. That's that. Yeah. We could probably go way back and just talk radio, especially Southern California radio.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Way back in the day. I am
as a hobby, I collect old radio shows and I'm involved with a couple of organizations that deal with vintage radio broadcasts. YesterdayUSA.com, the Red Network and the Blue Network, like on NBC. And I'm on the board of directors of the Radio Enthusiast of Puget Sound. And actually, in late March, we're going to be doing a recreation of a few radio shows at a radio showcase up in Washington. So it's a lot of fun. It's my first time. Well, this will be my second time acting and being characters in some of the old radio programs. But it is a lot of fun to do that, and collecting old radio shows is really a lot of fun because I get to hear how things were then, how much of an effect radio had like during World War II, and how people accepted the realities of what was happening on the radio. The first time they really got to hear so many things live. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, it's amazing fun. And it's theater of the mind, which is something I always enjoyed about radio. I think that's so cool that you're going to be portraying characters from old time radio shows. What kind of characters? Are you going to be the Shadow, or what are you going to do?
I think these are going to be comedies. I'm in a Phil Harris and Alice Faye show. I don't remember what the other ones are. There are several. I have to start memorizing my lines actually, because reading them is a little tougher, but I'll probably do that. But no, not any of the Shadow ones yet. We'll see down the line.
I love that. Yeah, back in the day, I worked at the Museum of Television and Radio as well, which used to be well, it's still in New York. It used to be in Beverly Hills. It's no longer there. They closed down a couple of years ago. But and you might want to check out the one in New York if you haven't yet, because they have a lot of those old time radio shows.
Yeah, well, the original museum that started, that I recall, was the Museum of television broadcasting, radio broadcasting, and it was in New York. And I actually was a member, and then I let my membership lapse. So I should really go back and see if I can regain my old membership number 589, but I should do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about taking this just back to, we've got folks who are listening who might be writers or thinking of writing, thinking of telling their story, their memoir. Now you have done this, plus you got that sales and marketing experience. So you're kind of uniquely positioned on so many different intersections. Any thoughts or advice for folks who are starting their own writing journey?
Every person in the world has a story to tell. And the beauty of writing it is having a way to tell it that lots of people can interact with. And again, if they don't feel that they're great writers, find someone to work with. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And when I do my podcast, I've had people say to me, "Well, I don't never been on a podcast. I don't think I can do that." And I said, "Look, we're going to have a conversation. You have conversations all the time." And they all come away after the podcast with, "This was great." And people who are writing can feel the same way. Everyone does have a story to tell. And if they choose to do it on their own, great. Don't just write it and that's it. Write it, read it, rewrite it, read it again, and rewrite it until you're really happy with it. And then get some other people to look at it. People who can tell you, "I like this about it. This was something I had a problem with or I had a hard time with." Accept that. Don't ever feel threatened or angry because somebody disagrees with part of it, because remember, everyone's different. But take that information. You can choose to use it or not, but get all the information that you can as you're going through it. But I believe everyone has a story to tell and they should tell their stories.
Absolutely. Great advice. And there's so many ways folks can do that nowadays, even virtually, going back to what you mentioned earlier. One of the benefits, I guess, out of what we went through was learning to use Zoom. And now those writers groups that were regulated to the library, now you can do them online and you can connect with folks online with beta readers. And I often stress to people, Michael, that much like what you're saying, you need different folks to help you out. So even if you are just writing alone and not collaborating, you still are going to need some kind of content or developmental edit, line editing, copy editing, proofreading. There's many layers and many stages to that process.
And then there's the book cover. And most people aren't great at art or think they know what they need to know and don't. So one of the pieces of advice I actually read in the last few weeks was, be sure you get somebody who really knows about book covers to help you create the cover, because you want to have something that will attract people. You talked about marketing earlier. People are going to look at the cover, and that is to a large degree going to determine whether they're going to pick up your book and read it. So you really want to make sure you have a book cover that is well designed, and that will help make any book more successful.
Absolutely. As well as the book description, which,
Right.
by the way, Michael, when I read yours, whoever wrote that, give props to that person. If that was you or a marketing person, they did such a great job. And I'm sure you heard it. I just pulled bits and pieces of it as my intro. And it's a great example of how it's a through line, right? Your messaging, your positioning, it informs your book description. It informs probably your social media, website, back of the book cover, and all the way down to the end when you're doing interviews like this.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, Michael, I know you've mentioned your forthcoming book and you've talked about some of the organizations and everything that you're involved with, but can you give us your details? Let folks know where they can go to find out more about you, find you online, and of course, find your books.
Well, of course, if anybody is looking for a speaker, easiest way is to email me at speaker, SPEAKER, at michaelhingson.com. Michael Hingson is MICHAELHINGSON. So speaker at michaelhingson.com if they might want to explore me coming to speak at an event. I'd love to do it, and we can talk about it. My website is www.michaelhingson.com. They can go to my podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And I also do a lot of work with a company called Accessiby, which help make internet websites more inclusive for persons with disabilities. And that company is called Accessiby, ACCESSI capital B-E. And Accessibee's website is www.accessibe.com. And I mentioned there, but also one of the reasons I mentioned Accessibee is that anyone who's doing anything with a website needs to make their website inclusive for people with disabilities. And most people don't do it. A lot of website developers don't really know how to do it. And Accessibee has a number of tools to help make websites more inclusive. In fact, one of the most inexpensive, which is like $500 a year, which will do a lot to make websites accessible, is available even for people to try. And if you go to accessibee.com, you can also do what they call a free audit. You can actually go into the free audit page, type in your website, and you'll get a report without any charge that tells you how accessible your site is or isn't. So a lot of ways to reach out. Again, love to hear from people. If people might want to be on the podcast, they can let me know. Again, they can reach me through speaker@michaelhingson.com or michaelhi@accessibee.com works as well. So we're findable. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook and a lot of the social media pages. I spend probably more time on LinkedIn than anything else, so people can find us there as well.
And in just a few minutes, BookFesters who are watching and listening, they probably have a million questions. So Michael, you're going to be with us during the live
I'm hanging around.
chats. You are. You're going to hang around and you're going to help us kick that off. Scott Ryan is hosting it. It's going to be a wild ride. So folks, if you have questions, please ask them in the YouTube chat to ensure that the team members can relay them to Michael.
And for me, I want to say there is absolutely no question off limits. I have to tell my story. I spoke once at a school, an elementary school, and I talked for about half hour talking about my dog and all sorts of stuff. The teachers and principal were all amazed that I kept the kids' interest for a half hour. But I then said, does anyone have any questions? Well, this young man, of course it was a boy, 3rd grade, stands up, and his question was, how do blind people have sex?
Oh
now,
my.
Like I said, no question is off limits. On the other hand, I'm not totally dumb. So my response was the same way everyone else does. And if you want to know more, you're going to have to go ask your parents.
Oh,
but no question is off limits.
No questions off limits. Okay, everybody, you heard it. Michael is going to answer all the questions, and I'm sure we're going to have many of them on cue. So
hope so.
Everybody, head on over to the YouTube chat. You can do it on Facebook too. Michael, we're streaming all over the place. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're probably on Twitter and a bunch of other places too. But in order to kind of funnel everything, if you ask those questions on the YouTube chat, it makes it a little easier on our team who are collecting them. They'll feed them in. Michael Hingson, you are an amazing individual. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to see you in a few minutes on the live author chats here at the BookFest Adventure. Spring 2024. Thank you so much. This was so delightful.
Thank you.